Something that comes up is who controls the internet? Is there somebody on top?
Creating monopolies don't serve consumer interests or protect rights well.
That evolution and emergence of systemic change is not happening.
Open source is the foundation for any kind of interconnected computers today.
On this journey, we're taking a peek behind the curtain at what's enabling our digital landscape. But a question keeps popping into the back of my mind. Is there a puppeteer behind the scenes secretly pulling the strings?
Something that comes up is who controls the internet? And is there somebody on top which is deciding how internet should look like, what internet should be deployed? And actually, that's not the case. Internet is a decentralized network, so there is nobody who controls the internet per se. Of course, we have organizations that help and coordinate things. ITF stands for Internet Engineering Task Force. It is an organization established in 1986, so it's been there for a while. And the idea of this organization was that we need to write down the internet standards. Everybody who is implementing these same set of protocols and networks, building networks, can work with each other.
So as it turns out, there are several puppeteers shaping the performance of the internet. There are two organizations that stand out when we want to look at how the internet's infrastructure impacts its openness and freedom. One is the IETF, and the other is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, otherwise known as ICANN.
So ICANN is the organization that most people have probably never heard of. We manage what are known as the identifiers that are in the background of the internet. Think about things like IP addresses, domain names. And the other side of what ICANN does is develop the policies that say how and by whom those names can be registered. The policy is made by what we call our community. Our community is made up of pretty much anybody who has an interest in the policies governing the domain name space and the generic domain name space.
The multi-stakeholder approach creates trust in that it's not one central entity inside deciding how the internet is governed. It's not one particular government, for example, that's defining policy. It's not one particular tech company that's defining policy. It's everyone at the table, all coming together to build consensus about how the internet needs to change and evolve in the future.
So it's not like ICANN is some secret puppet master pulling the strings behind the scene. They're transparent. It's like when the Ukraine went to them and asked them to remove Russia's domains from the internet. They discussed it openly, and they said no. This is ICANN's multi-stakeholder approach at work.
SSL certificates is another upcoming topic. Google Chrome has essentially said that they will only support SSL certificates with a life cycle of 90 days. Currently, the certificates are supported up to 365 days. It's a good example of Chrome, Google using their market power to be able to push regulation through and will become an industry standard.
But shouldn't the IETF have stepped in, since they are the governing body around protocols?
So IETF standards are voluntary. Some organization that might have some monopoly over an output. So if we take an example of Google Chrome, and if Google Chrome, which is the dominant browser, they sometimes can go and make policies which might be different from the recommendations that the IETF has put out. So it is unique in this way that our standards are not binding in any way. It works on the goodwill of the people who are implementing them. And everything runs on technical reasons. And if there is a technical reasons out there for a particular implementation to deviate, they will go ahead and deviate.
Although the IETF and ICANN both have democratic multi-stakeholder approaches, ICANN's regulations are not voluntary. But honestly, if we take a look at what Google is suggesting, is it really that bad? The longer a security certificate is online, the more opportunity a bad actor has to break that security. But honestly, over the years, tech companies have been getting bigger and more powerful.
The big companies there that, are this close for monopolies on the systemic solutions they provide. We have Google, Apple, maybe even SAP, IBM, and we can go on forever. These are solutions that get more and more effective in what exactly they do, which means that evolution and emergence of systemic change is not happening.
Creating monopolies don't serve consumer interests or protect rights well. When companies acquire more power and they don't need to compete with other companies for customers' business, then the customer loses leverage, right?
And that's why the open source movement matters. It attempts to dilute the control through transparent, community-driven platforms. But as we delve deeper, we must navigate the intricate terrain where open source ideals intersects with the rise of proprietary systems that are built upon free and democratic code.
Open source is the foundation for any kind of interconnected computers today. The Android phone in your pocket is running Linux. Chances are the Wi-Fi access point in your home is running Linux. Chances are today your car is running a variant of Linux, and that plus the GNU software tools on top and the many open community, open source provided packages are what enables our modern interconnected world.
Open source plays a very important role in making sure that our standards are implemented correctly. They can be analyzed by researchers and experimented by researchers as well.
Open source, with foundational elements like MySQL, form an integral part of our ecosystem, serving as the bedrock that keeps the internet infrastructure transparent and accountable. But there's been a shift. Less talk about open source, more talk about open standards.
So standards is for developers. Just look at, for example, you have Open Office and then you have a PowerPoint. They kind of should operate together, they don't really, because there's no standard. There actually is a standard that Microsoft has agreed to, but they're not following it. So just because you're standard doesn't help if you don't force all players to do that.
Same, I agree with you.
Standards is good and there's no conflict. It's just a question that forces both open source and closed source to work better.
Think about the difference between open standards and open source. An open standard tells you an interface, an abstraction of how to do something, but not actually how to do it. Open source gives you the power to do it. Open source gives you the power to say, spin up a virtual machine, spin up a Kubernetes worker, start the thing, and I can interact with it right away. No barriers, no boundaries, and that's the power of open source.
As we explore open standards and open source, we find that success depends on more than definitions. It requires code transparency and community involvement. This will help ensure that we have a free and open internet. Have you ever thought about how our online freedoms can be subtly influenced? Take this common situation. One website refuses to load, but another opens seamlessly. It's about more than connectivity issues. It's about choices.
Throttling is a practice by which internet service providers can slow down their customer service in a way that limits the total amount of bandwidth that gets consumed. This can allow ISPs, internet service providers, to minimize network congestion, and in more concerning ways can allow them to charge more for the privileges of higher bandwidth. Throttling can also have some interesting implications for content, shaping the content that people can see, because ISPs don't just have to throttle speeds universally. So hypothetically, it could push you towards Netflix over Hulu, if that's what a provider wanted to do. Or it might make it very difficult functionally for you to access a site that a particular government doesn't want you visiting.
We like to think our internet is free because our government doesn't officially censor content. When we think of blatant content censorship, we tend to think of China's Great Firewall. When China decided to build the Great Firewall, it required a nationwide deployment of advanced IP and DNS filtering systems to block blacklisted websites and content down to the keyword level. This all meant the internet service providers had to be taken over by the government. All connections had to be rebuilt to route all traffic through centrally controlled local and international gateways. State-level inspection and filtering systems were placed at the internet exchange points within China to filter traffic internally. China fundamentally transformed its internet infrastructure, operations, and regulatory framework to achieve that level of content governance. Now, this level of censorship has fueled some stereotypes about Chinese internet users.
Just because they have the firewall doesn't mean that people can't access the wider internet, right? It's only certain websites that are actually blocked by the firewall. The stereotype, I think, mostly is that people just don't have any idea of what's going on in the Western world or outside of China, which is completely untrue. I would say that at this moment in time, Chinese people on average are certainly A, more digitally savvy and have better digital literacy, and B, are just more open to adaptations and changes in the way that they use internet-based services to help improve their daily lives.
Are we at a disadvantage because we believe our internet is free? Does our Western digital complacency limit our economic opportunities? Join us next time as we unravel the complex world of content governance, the battle for our borderless internet.